Welcome back to Midnight Brew and Mysteries, the podcast where we explore the unexplained, the mysterious, and the chilling tales that keep us awake long after the coffee runs out. Usually, I'm the one bringing the stories to you, the haunted hotels, the cursed houses, and the strange phenomenon that defy explanation. But today we're switching things up. Today it's not about what I've found, it's about what you've experienced. I asked you to send in your personal, real life, paranormal, and unexplained encounters, the moments that made you question reality, the unexplainable footsteps, the visions you couldn't account for, and the things that go bump in the night when you're sure you're the only one home. There were many responses sent in, and it seems many of you have had experiences that logic can't quite touch. So grab your favorite drink, pull up a chair, and turn down the lights. We're about to open the floor to your stories. And before I get started with today's episode, I just want to say a humongous thank you to every one of you that submitted a story for the Listener Stories episode. You guys have no idea how much it means to me, and this podcast would not be possible without you, without your comments, without you listening, without you telling me what you think about the different episodes that we discuss. So a humongous thank you to each and every person that submitted a story for this episode. I was so excited to read these stories, and I really think everyone is going to enjoy them. So thank you again to every single person who pitched in and put a story in for this episode. And if you're listening today, thank you so much for being a listener of today's episode as well. So let's get started first with story number 1. And this is actually my story that I'm submitting for today's episode. So let's go ahead and let's get started. A Haunted House by Susie Lucas. From the ages of roughly 19 to 35, I lived at my parents' house in Louisville, Kentucky. My parents owned a modest 4-bedroom, 2-bath house in a pretty nice neighborhood that was in more of a rural area at the time. Our neighborhood was lined with many trees, hills, and fields. Since my parents and I moved into the house, we experienced many unexplained encounters. One such encounter was frequent knocking at the door. There was one moment when I was in the kitchen doing laundry and heard a clear knocking on the door. "Mom, is someone at the door?" I yelled out. "I didn't see anyone out there," my mom yelled back from another room. I put the clothes down on the dryer and walked to the front door and looked outside, but like my mom said, there was no one out there. Just a sunny day outside with a slight breeze. The knocking happened many times, sometimes at the front door, sometimes at the back door. Each time, there would usually be no one there. One particular time, my husband and I were over at my parents' house, visiting, and it was evening time. We were all sitting in the living room, watching something on the TV, likely funny animal videos or an old movie. There is one door in the living room next to the fireplace leading out onto the deck in the backyard, and my parents would hardly ever use it. I can only think of a handful of times when we might have went out that door. I remember at this point that we all got up to go into the kitchen to get a snack or a drink, and when we got back into the living room, I noticed the door in the living room ajar, with the darkness outside visible through the opening. We were all surprised, not able to figure out how the door came open, since it was always usually locked, and none of us had opened it. There were many instances of odd things happening around that house, from lights that would come on by themselves to random things falling off the walls or around the house. I often sometimes thought I heard footsteps or someone walking around the house. Honestly, I never really liked being home alone in that house. I always felt like something was there with me, even if I was alone. When I got my dog Muffin, over the years, she would often bark at something outside when nothing was there. There was also one experience where, after hearing noises in the wall, we found a large pile of dead mice and baby mice in a wall in the basement. I can honestly say that I have always felt uneasy in that house, and I never felt quite alone. By the way, I do want to mention that my parents' house, when we were living there, my mom's neighbor's dad, who also lived with them, he actually shot himself in the head with a gun. So always felt a little bit weird. The fact that he had committed suicide right next door in the basement at the neighbor's house definitely really didn't help things be any less uncomfortable. Story 2: The Wailing Woman. Submitted by Alondra. I was laying in bed at 1 a.m. texting my now husband when I started hearing crying in the front yard. I thought maybe it was a cat or a coyote, but as it got louder, it sounded like a woman wailing. I had very transparent curtains at that time, so I could see the motion lights turning off and on as the crying was going on and on. I was scared that my dog was going to start barking as she was laying next to the window towards the end of my bed, but it was like she was oblivious to the wailing. After a couple minutes, the crying stopped, but I still could see the lights going off and on outside, so I grabbed my blanket and my dog as fast as I could and went to sleep in the living room. I told my family the next day, and nobody else heard it. A week later, my older sister was outside at midnight and she heard it down the street. She was frozen in fear and finally snapped out of it and went inside. That same morning, she got a call that her grandpa in Mexico had passed away. And when she texted to tell me, I went home at noon. My sisters and nephews were outside waiting for me when they said everything fell silent. The birds stopped chirping and an eerie breeze started along with an owl hooting. Sometimes, when it's raining late at night, I can still hear the wailing at a distance, and my brother has heard it at the same times I have. I wanted to share with you a clip that Alondra shared with me of some of the wailing sounds that she heard that night. And I also found it very scary that at the same time, we discovered that there was a red orb in the room. Number 3, The Flies. Submitted by Chanel. In 2020, I was working for another company and I was on vacation, relaxing home with the kids, 2 boys and a young daughter. We were home relaxing, all of us. Then I noticed a fly flying around. I tried killing it. Then finally I did. Then I see another fly come out of nowhere. Then another and another. Numerous flies started flying around in our house. My kids started asking me, what's going on? Where are all these flies coming from? I told them I had no idea. We started killing them. grabbing towels, wrapping them around to swing to knock flies to the floor, and then we stepped on them. Even my youngest baby, my daughter, was trying to help us. The more we killed the flies, the more they multiplied. And there were no windows or doors opened at all in my home. We were like, where are they coming from? Finally, we killed all of the flies. When we walked through the home, we saw what appeared to be between 60 and 100 dead flies on the ground. I swept up the dead flies, mopped the floor, and dumped them outside in a trash can. That was the craziest, weirdest experience that I have ever had in my life. To this day, I have no idea where those flies came from and how they got into the home. It was literally as if they appeared out of nowhere. That home had other issues as well. We used to hear small, baby, childlike footsteps day and night running as if a child was running through the house. My oldest son saw a shadow running by on the wall. But that, my friends, is another story for next time. Story number 4. Not Alone in Here. Submitted by Sarah. I've never really been someone who believed in ghosts. If something weird happened, I'd usually come up with a logical explanation. That's probably why this still sticks with me. A few years ago, I rented an older apartment. It wasn't famous or haunted as far as I knew, just an aging brick building with creaky floors and thin walls. Everything was normal for the first couple of months. Then little things started happening. I'd come home and find a kitchen cabinet open when I knew I'd closed it. Sometimes the bathroom light would be on, even though I was sure I'd turned it off before leaving. I figured I was just distracted. One Saturday morning, I was making coffee when I heard footsteps in the hallway leading to my bedroom. Slow, like someone casually walking through the apartment. I assumed maintenance had come in without knocking, and I walked into the hallway, and nobody was there. The front door was still locked from the inside. It was strange, but I convinced myself the sound came from another apartment. A couple weeks later, my sister came over to watch a movie. About halfway through, she muted the TV and asked, "Did you hear someone whisper?" I hadn't heard anything. She kept looking toward the hallway for the rest of the night. I never told her about the footsteps. The part that really bothered me happened about a month later. A friend came over for dinner, and while we were talking, she suddenly stopped and looked down the hallway. She asked, "Who's here?" I laughed and told her, "Nobody." She looked confused. "I thought someone just walked into your bedroom." I lived alone. She got up and checked anyway, and there wasn't anyone there. After that, I started sleeping with my bedroom door closed. One night, around 3 in the morning, I woke up to 3 slow knocks on my bedroom door. Knock, knock, knock. I sat there listening. Nothing. Finally, I opened the door. The apartment was empty. What unsettled me most was my dog. Normally, he'd follow me everywhere, but that night he refused to leave the bed. He just stared down the hallway with his ears up, completely silent. A few months later, my lease ended and I moved. I never mentioned any of it to the landlord because honestly, what was I supposed to say? Almost a year later, I ran into the woman who lived across the hall. We talked for a few minutes before she asked why I'd moved. I shrugged and said I wanted a newer place. She smiled and said, "Probably for the best." I asked what she meant. She looked at me for a second and asked, "Did you ever hear footsteps in your apartment at night?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. She just nodded and said, "I heard them too." Maybe there was a perfectly normal explanation. Maybe sounds just carried through the building in a weird way, or maybe someone else was walking those halls long after everyone else had gone to bed. Story number 5. The Woman at the Window by Vanessa. My friend, who was my boyfriend back around 15 years ago, we went for a walk early evening. Along the way, we stopped off at Belgrave Gardens. I was just admiring the old buildings there and was looking up at the top window of Belgrave Hall. That's when I saw a woman at the top window looking at me. She was dressed in a maid's uniform. I know it wasn't an event going on in the hall, as it was all in darkness and locked. I kept looking at her, and all of a sudden, she just vanished. Story number 6. We both saw the same thing. Submitted by Ryan from Tennessee. I've camped for years, so I'm usually the last person to jump to paranormal conclusions, but there's one trip I still can't explain. My cousin and I were camping deep in a national forest, far enough from the main campground that we hadn't seen another person all day. Around midnight, the fire had burned down to glowing coals, and we were just sitting there talking. That's when I noticed what looked like a person standing between two trees. At first, I thought it was another camper, but something felt off about it, wrong. It wasn't moving, it wasn't shifting its weight or looking around. It was just a solid black shape, darker than anything else around it. I asked my cousin, "Do you see that?" He got quiet and said, "Yeah, don't look away." We stared at it for what felt like a minute. Neither of us said anything. Then, without warning, it stepped behind a tree. Not walked, just one slow step, and disappeared behind the trunk. The tree couldn't have hidden a person. It was way too narrow. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it over there immediately. Nothing. No person, no animal, just empty woods. Neither of us said much after that. We threw more wood on the fire and tried to convince ourselves it was our imagination before finally crawling into the tent. Sometime before sunrise, I woke up because everything had gone completely silent. No crickets, no frogs, nothing. I looked through the mesh window of the tent. About 20 feet away, right at the edge of the trees, was the same black figure, except this time it was closer. I froze. It looked almost human, but there were no features, no face, just a pitch black outline that somehow looked darker than the night around it. I reached over and quietly shook my cousin awake. He took one look through the mesh and whispered, "Don't let it know we're awake." I've never heard fear in someone's voice like that. We didn't move. We didn't unzip the tent. We just laid there listening to our own breathing. After what felt like forever, I finally worked up the nerve to look again. It was gone. The birds started chirping about 10 minutes later, like someone had flipped a switch. We packed up without eating breakfast and left as soon as there was enough daylight to see the trail. On the way home, my cousin admitted something he hadn't told me that night. He said when he first saw the figure by the fire, he thought it was farther back in the woods. When I woke him up before sunrise, he realized it was standing in almost the exact spot where we'd been sitting just a few hours earlier. Whatever we saw had gotten closer while we slept. I've been camping dozens of times since then, still love the woods. And every now and then, when I'm sitting by a campfire and I catch myself staring into the tree line, I can't shake the feeling that something might be standing there, perfectly still, waiting for me to notice it. Story number 7. My dog walks at night. Submitted by Whitney. Growing up from about the time I was in elementary school until I was graduating high school, we had a pet dog, Abby. Abby was a small dog, a Shih Tzu with soft brown and white fur. Abby was a funny little dog. She was definitely the family pet, and I always thought of her as my best friend. Abby was good for cuddles, and also for getting rid of any scraps we had after dinner. I remember many times when she would come in my room at night and lay down. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night to hear her licking herself in my room or cleaning her fur. I would usually yell out, "Abby, stop doing that, I'm trying to sleep." She would usually stop for a minute and then go right back to licking herself. If you have a dog also, you know how dogs can be. They clean themselves at the strangest moments. My friends would often come over, and Abby was always really good with everyone she met. She would do this thing where if you told her to smile, she would show her teeth to you and kind of snort a little. Sometimes it looked like she really was smiling. Once I was a senior in high school, Abby started getting not only older, but sicker. She started having problems eating and would often be lethargic. This went on for a while, and finally one day we took Abby to the vet. "I'm afraid she has cancer of the liver," the vet said. It was heartbreaking. I most definitely hated seeing Abby this way. We took her home while we decided what to do. After a few months of trying to keep Abby comfortable and things not getting better, we decided to put her down. It was the hardest decision we ever had to make. It was a horrible day and one I hate thinking about. We went home after that to our empty house. It already seemed so weird without Abby there. A few days went by and I felt truly heartbroken about Abby. It seemed so weird not having her around or begging for food. One particular night I was having a little trouble sleeping. After high school ended, I had gotten a job at Marshall's and I really needed to get sleep because I had to work in the morning. I kept tossing and trying to relax and drift away. I then heard a sound down the hallway, a tippy-tap in the dark, like nails on the wooden floor. Tip-tap, tip-tap, tip-tap. I recognized the sound. It sounded just like when Abby used to come in my room. I had to be dreaming, I thought. I heard the sound stop. I'm just tired, I thought. I have to get to sleep. I then heard another faint sound, but this time it was right here in my room. Licking. Yes, that was the exact sound. The exact sound of a dog licking themselves or cleaning their fur. I peeked out from under my covers and didn't see anything, yet the licking continued. I knew immediately what it was. Abby, cleaning herself. But Abby was gone. However, there was no mistaking that sound. Abby was right here with me. She had come to visit me. I felt something fill my heart right then, and I let that sound lull me to sleep. This happens every now and again, the sounds in our house. Even to this day, when I stay with and visit my parents, in the middle of the night and sometimes in the early morning, I will wake up to the sound of tippy taps on the floor or the sound of a dog licking its fur, and I know that Abby is right there with me. Perhaps her spirit never really left at all. I have asked my family if they ever heard it too, and they say they have. My mom even said she hears a dog whimpering in the kitchen when she's cooking, begging for food. I like to think it's just Abby. Abby's way of letting us know she's there. Story number 8. The Shapeshifter. Submitted by Alondra. Around February 2021, my sister was at our house. As the sun started to set, she loaded my nephews into their car seats. Back then, where we lived, it was mainly fields all the way down to the road that takes you onto the highway. As my sister was driving past the creek around a curve, she said a huge owl jumped from the side of the road onto her windshield. When this bird hit her windshield hood, it was so loud it scared her, and she hit her brakes as hard as she could and came to a complete stop. As she did this, the owl slid off to the other side of the car, but staring straight into my sister's eyes without looking away. My nephews started crying as they got scared from her stopping her car so fast. She described this owl as bigger than any normal owl with a very old woman's face. She said it stared down at her and she was terrified. She continued to drive home. When she got home, she told the kid's dad, which he did not believe. Later that night, they heard terrifying cackling right outside their window. The kid's dad wanted to look out the window and she told him not to, as she said she thought it was a witch, because in Mexican culture people say witches shapeshift into owls. My sister also worked night shift and would come home when it was still dark outside around 3 to 4 a.m. and she could see a fireball along the tree line following and keeping up with her car. She never saw it again after a couple times of her saying that this fireball would follow her home and to work along the tree lines, which my mom said she saw when she would be out with my sister when it was dark outside. Wow, those were some really awesome stories. I feel a little bit of having some chills, especially after that last one there. Wow. What did you guys think of today's listener stories? Oh my gosh, a lot of them are so creepy and that's just crazy. Some of the things that you guys sent in. And that brings us to the end of another journey into the unknown. Whether these mysteries are echoes of the past, manifestations of our own fears, or something else entirely, one thing is certain. The world is far stranger than we often dare to imagine. Thank you for grabbing a drink, spending your time with me tonight. If you have your own stories, if you felt a shift in the air, seen something you couldn't explain, or simply have a mystery you're dying to hear me cover, please reach out. Your stories are the heartbeat of the show, and I love to share them in a future episode. Until next time, keep your doors locked, your mind open, and remember, the shadows are always listening. Thank you for tuning in to Midnight Brew and Mysteries. I will see you guys in the next one.